one thing that kind of stuck out to me from his tips is to try and do things yourself. And there are certain things that I just don't want to try and do myself.
Yeah. Hey everybody, that sound means it's time for another episode of Front End Fire, the weekly show that helps you stay up to date on the latest and the greatest in the front end world. My name is TJ Van Tol. I have Paige Niedringhaus with me.
Hello, everybody.
And Jack Harrington.
Hey there.
And we've got kind of a wild set of news. We got a little bit of everything. We got some React. We got some Storybook. We got some Apple storytelling that I'm going to do. So why don't we jump into it?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Jack, I'm going to let you kick things off because I think you got some React
updates
for us.
Yeah. So React is going and taking its view transition tag or component, and now a new activity component, closer to production release. So this is on the experimental branch. So if you go and take your React dependency and just set it to experimental and React DOM, then you'll have access to, what I want to talk about is activity. So we've talked about view transition in the past. It's a nice wrapper around the page transition stuff. But the activity stuff is actually kind of interesting too. So you'll take unstable activity, which is everything's prefixed with unstable, and then map that to activity. And then you get this nice activity component. And what it does is there's one property on it, mode, visible or hidden. And the idea is that, we oftentimes have components that we could have visible that are like eating a lot of updates and cycles, like graphs in particular, that aren't visible, but we want them to be instantly visible when you have them ready to go or when the user wants them. Mm-hmm. So what this allows you to do is actually kind of wrap the hidden or visible graph in one of these activity components, and then it will put in a low priority queue, if it's hidden, the update of that graph. So that when you flip that switch, React will just take its precompiled DOM ready to go because it's been updating in the background and just bop that into the tree, and then you're good to go. So you don't have any of that lag of like computing the graph and all that. But because it's in a low priority queue, right, you still have the interactivity that's really good if it is hidden, and then that great responsiveness. So I think it's a cool flag. Cool component. I've been playing around with it this morning in that scenario of having like hundreds of graphs on a dashboard, and it's pretty cool actually.
I think it's pretty common. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. So I have an app with graphs. I have CO2 monitors throughout my house that are sending me data, and I built a web app where I have graphs between them. So
right.
Let's say I'm in my app, I'm looking at just one of my monitors, like my bedroom one. I'm doing some stuff, I'm making some changes, but then new data is coming in the background in the meantime. I'm getting new readings.
Yep.
So is the idea that I would wrap my other charts for the ones that the user isn't seeing at the moment in this activity, so that in that background data gets kind of reflected in it, even though the user's not seeing it, so that when they see it, it pops up faster? Is that
exactly.
the gist of it?
On a low priority queue. So if you are, everything that you do normally, like just interact with it or interact with the app in general, is going to be in a higher priority queue than that. So the app is going to remain responsive, even though like in the downtimes when it's not doing anything, it's keeping those background graphs updated so that should you want to then go over and take a look at another room, whatever it is, then it'll just automatically, or just it's ready, all that is ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does this actually affect the visibility of that component on the page as well? So
yeah, it actually
you don't have
does.
to do like the CSS display of none or hidden or some other class like that?
Yeah, it handles that, right? So
nice.
The idea is if you used to do like return null out of something and say, I'm not hidden, I'm going to return null, whatever.
Yeah.
Then this is just a really nice way to kind of because you know you're going to pay for it when you become not null, right? It's going to have to go and render all the graphs and figure out all the vertices and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So this is just a way to kind of like say, okay, you could be there, but you're not there right now. So just keep yourself warm, and then when you're ready, pop up. And it does things like if you are running out of memory and stuff like that, it'll basically just okay, I'll just let that go.
We've come a long ways, because I remember back in the day when I wanted to do this sort of thing, you'd use like jQuery to make it render off the screen so that it's getting the updates, but the user isn't seeing it.
Off to the side somewhere.
Yeah, and then you bring it back in, and it's nice to see a more a modern approach to solving that problem.
And even off the screen though, if it's still rendering in the same thread at the same level of same priority, then you're gonna have the issue where like you're gonna try and hit other buttons. Everything would be super slow because you're like rendering all these graphs and stuff.
It was not an elegant solution.
No,
but it was the only tool that we really had for doing it at the time.
Right. And you could do things. You could do fun things. You could use the intersection observer along with this. You're gonna say, it's actually off the screen. So I'm gonna keep it on a low priority thread to, keep it going. It's pretty cool.
That's a great idea. That would make a lot of things simpler too. Like we have on our Blues website, our dev.blues website, we have these animations that start playing, and it's like steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and each one has a little different video associated with it. But we don't want it to start until the user has scrolled down the page to where the videos and steps are. So intersection observer is being used heavily, and there's just some other black magic happening that I had to implement to get it to work. And it sounds like this would make it a lot easier, and we are using Next.js for it, so it could be coming to us soon.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. They do kind of keep up with the experimental stuff, but if for those non-Next.js users, pretty easy. Just go over on the experimental branch, and generally speaking, everything else works. So you're just getting access to these new unstable components.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, Paige, you have some Storybook news?
I do. Storybook 9 beta is out, and Storybook is very excited about this. They want everybody to try it, to know that it's available, and to think of it more as and this is from their website, a lean, mean testing machine.
Ooh.
Okay.
All right.
So Storybook, for people who haven't used it or are not as familiar, it's a front-end, I guess, tool is the best way to describe it, for building UI components and pages in isolation. So if you had particularly styled buttons or even like more complex components, and you wanted to see all the different variations that you could do with them, or you wanted your designers to have access to them so that they could make mock-ups that were really specific to your application, you might use something like Storybook. And it's very easy to change props, to see different states, to test everything without having to have a fully running application to interact with these components. But over the years, Storybook has evolved, and it seems to be trending more towards being not just a visual way to see everything and kind of tweak knobs and dials, but to also test components in more of a functional way. So they talk about, they have a lot of updates with Storybook 9. They have component testing that is now powered by vtest. So fastest test runner, everyone loves it. Everybody who's tried it adopts it. So they're using that now. They have interaction testing. So as soon as you make a change to a particular component, it will rerun the tests, and you can see exactly if your tests pass, if they fail, if you need to adjust them, etc. They have accessibility testing now, so you can run accessibility across all of your stories. You can inspect violations through this little nice UI GUI that they have, so you can really drill down quickly and fix those accessibility issues. They have visual testing, so you can pinpoint changes in your UI down to the pixel, which I think is pretty exciting because everybody's always had problems with this. There's entire testing frameworks that are just for visual testing, regression testing. So now Storybook offers it. They have test coverage reports, which are very similar if you've ever used something like this before. It's just a nice, like, every component has, green, red, yellow percentages of how many of the different variations are being tested. And it is 48% lighter than Storybook 8. So they've got all this new great stuff, and it is half as big as the previous version.
This looks really nice. I mean, every time I've tinkered with Storybook, it's always been a positive experience. Their UI is really good, and especially for visual things like components, it's great. I just haven't had the use case for it in like a production setting. It's one of those things I'd love to add. It's just the time it takes to do it. But I mean, all this stuff looks really nice.
Yeah, I think that's always kind of been the issue with Storybook, is that it's great if you have maybe a big enterprise team and you're all using a similar component library that your company has dictated and kind of maintains. But otherwise, it's just a lot of extra work to keep the components up to date, make sure the props are staying, in line with whatever's actually being used in your application. It's just a lot of extra maintenance that a lot of development teams just don't have the time to do. In which case, choose a component library off the shelf, slap your colors on it, and feel good that it's being built by another company that they care about this a lot.
It is nice to have it kind of lying around, though. So if you, I remember at a previous job, we did some really intricate graph work that was unique to us. It was like a specific visualization, yada, yada, yada. And so having that is like a pulled out into the Storybook so that the designers could actually look at it and all its different modes and all that kind of stuff and dial it in was really cool because it allows them to look at stuff in complete isolation as opposed to on the page where you're starting to get what's this thing over here? And you're like, well, that has nothing to do with what we're working on right now. So please don't comment on that.
Well, and it sounds like, especially from what they've been doing lately in this update, because Storybook started off as almost specifically for component libraries, like that's all it was doing. But now they're weaving in some of these other testing workflows. They kind of seem like they want to be a one-stop shop for your visual testing. It's like everything under one roof, and I think it's a great idea.
Yeah,
it's because a lot of us have some bits of this through just some CLI processes, but especially with visual stuff, it's so nice to just have a UI where you can just see visually what's going on.
Yeah. And I've noticed some of the other big testing frameworks are trying to do this, like Cypress. They started out originally as end-to-end testing only, but then they have migrated into component testing and integration testing as well. So yeah, it's a great idea to just bundle it all into one, so you don't have to, kind of cobble together all these different things and make sure you look at the regression testing and the visual testing and the accessibility testing. Just have one tool that does it all. That's kind of great.
I love Storybook up until I'll install it and it's great, and I'll install version 7 or whatever it is, and then version 8 will come out and I'll be like, oh yeah, and it's even got little things along the bottom that says you should upgrade to version 8, or this sort of thing, and then you try to do the versioning and it just completely shreds, and I don't know whatever it is, but I've run into this a few times of this, but otherwise I love Storybook. It's that upgrade path though can always be treacherous.
Well, I can't speak to the upgrade path because I have not upgraded, and frankly, we don't use Storybook at our company either because we're small and we need to move fast. But in the past, I have used it, I have liked it, but I've never had to do the upgrade. So I'll take your word for it, Jack, that it's not the easiest or smoothest transition.
Awesome. So speaking of transitions, I'll move on to my news.
Oh, right.
This week I wanted to talk about a research study that came out called The Impact of Generative AI on Critical Thinking. This was put forward by Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon, so a decently reputable source behind this. And I was cued into this because this study was done several weeks ago, but Adi Osmani wrote a really excellent piece that talked about this and just the conversation in general, called Avoiding Skill Atrophy in the Age of AI. I have both of them linked in the show notes. I'd recommend if you pick one to read Addie's because the actual research post is written like a research article and it's not the most user-friendly thing to go through. But anyways, the gist of this, their findings was that they found that workers with AI assistants produced a less diverse set of solutions for the same problem, since AI tends to deliver homogenized answers based on its training data. And then in the researchers' words, this uniformity can be seen as a, quote, deterioration of critical thinking itself. And they also found that the more people leaned on AI tools, the less critical thinking they engaged in, making it harder to summon these skills when needed. So I don't think this is a huge surprise. I don't think anybody I mean, it's cool that they did this with about 400 participants, and then they monitored their activity and all this stuff. So it's nice to see it kind of verified in more of a scientific way. But I think all of us that have used AI tools would certainly say that some bit of our critical thinking has kind of deteriorated along the way.
Yeah, a little bit.
But and here's the thing that I was just thinking about as you were talking. A lot of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis in code are not new. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're trying to handle errors well. We're trying to, write CRUD endpoints that are stable and follow patterns that people understand or recognize. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing, people have done before. So the fact that the outcome may be less diverse in terms of solutions might also make it more readable, more easily understood, more just something that you've seen before, so you feel more familiar to it or feel more familiar with the code. So yeah, I can see how it could be, and certainly for people who are less senior in their careers and have not struggled the way that we have with Stack Overflow and documentation and just bugs that will not fix themselves. Yeah, I get it. But I also think that there's something to be said for more consistent code and kind of better practices that you might learn from the way that your AI suggests you try writing this component or handling this thing.
Yeah, so Addie had some recommendations at the bottom, and I'll just breeze through them real quick because I think I agree with most of them. So his recommendations for how to avoid skill atrophy in an AI world are: number one, practice AI hygiene. Always verify and understand. So when the AI generates something, make sure you know what it did. And if you don't, then you can even ask the AI, what is this? Just try to understand what it did. Right. Then his second point is know AI for fundamentals. Sometimes the struggle is good. So set aside part of your time for, quote, manual mode coding. So I agree, at least with the second part of that it's sometimes just good to just say, okay, I'm going to tackle this problem, no AI, just to keep the skills sharp for doing that sort of thing. The next one is always attempt a problem yourself before asking the AI. This one I don't know if I agree with as much, but Addie's tips. And then next one is use AI to augment, not replace code review, engage in active learning, follow up and iterate, pair program with the AI instead of treating the AI like an API, try a pair programming mindset. So those are Addie's recommendations. I don't know what you two think. Like I said, I agree with some of that and disagree with some of it.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I agree with that. I guess, I was thinking when, you brought up this article that there is, I've noticed in myself that there are times when AI is super helpful. If it is something, just like Paige said, if it's the kind of thing where people have done this 1,000 times before. Here's some data that we got out of a database, so we got to make a table out of it. It's, bang, 100%. It was super easy. And then there are other times when it's just a lot harder. It just doesn't know what you're doing and that sort of stuff. And it's honestly fighting with you. Mm-hmm. And I find that for myself, it's a little I feel super productive when I am in that I'm rolling and the AI is helping me and all that. And then I feel absolutely like I'm walking through molasses when it's not and when it's actually fighting me. And that can be really hard to deal with. And that that kind of emotional differential between those two things. Yeah. So, that's kind of, and I kind of see through his hygiene stuff, that's, you're trying to keep yourself from that loss, but it's hard when, when it's really rolling, it's hard to not roll with it,
Right. And for one thing that kind of stuck out to me from his tips is to try and do things yourself. And there are certain things that I just don't want to try and do myself. For instance, I was trying this week, I was building a table that I wanted to be able to reorder the rows for. I wanted users to be able to drag and drop rows in different orders and then save that new order into the database.
Yeah.
And I saw one example of it on the Ant Design website where they had used D&D Kit or some other library to make it work. And I did not want to go and learn the D&D Kit library for this one piece of functionality that I wanted. So I put the link to the Ant Design example into Claude Code, or Claude Desktop, excuse me. I linked to the D&D Kit library, and I told it, here's my code now, here's my table, I want to make it draggable, figure it out. And it took us a good couple, 2-3 iterations to get there. But eventually it did, and everything, I'd figured out all the bugs, and if you click into the table to edit it, then suddenly you're trying to drag it instead of editing in the input and things like that. But eventually we got there. And I don't even know if I ever would have figured out how to do all that implementation if it was just me trying to figure it out from the code and look at their docs and then implement it in my own application. So, I think that there are certain situations that because we have examples or because there is code out there that the AIs are aware of and have been trained on, that we can do more ambitious things than we could have previously. Previously, I probably would have tried to make another screen that was just for reordering, that was just like, I don't know how I would have implemented it, to be honest, but it probably would not have been as elegant and in the same table for editing and reordering and adding and deleting and all that stuff.
I think just as development in general, one of the hardest things to do is make pragmatic decisions about what to learn and what to not. And this is true outside of AI, because if you're a new developer to the world of front end, there are a bajillion things to learn. There's HTTP, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all these APIs. And I think smart developers kind of take a very pragmatic approach to this, just focusing on things that are going to be long-term valuable to you. Like, for example, D&D page, you're probably not going to be using that regularly in the future. So it's a great candidate to just toss to the AI and say, whatever, let it do its thing. I'm going to make sure it works, maybe write some tests around it or whatever, but great. But if it's something more core to what you're doing or something that you're going to be using on a regular basis, then that's the sort of thing that it's probably more important that you understand what you're doing and don't just let the AI generate a bunch of stuff, because if it's code that you're going to be maintaining or tweaking over time, that's going to bite you at some point if you don't really know what's going on. But I don't think AI has fundamentally changed this all that much. I mean, it has made it easier to generate some of this stuff, but it's still the same conundrum that we've dealt with for software developers for decades at this point.
Yeah, it's build versus buy, right? At the end of the day, I worked with a startup founder at one point, and he was like, and we would talk about, we want to own this. This is the IP of the company. Everything else is just, straight up, just pull it off the shelf. Close enough is good enough kind of thing. Like maybe that drag and drop library isn't exactly perfect or whatever, Yeah, but we don't it's not our thing. Like we don't want to invest in that. Yeah, exactly. So invest in your IP.
Yeah, and if you have a solid foundation, like a good code base that's well structured or well thought out in terms of like this is how we handle API calls and this is how we do components and this is how we do X, Y, and Z, I think you'll have a lot better results from the AI. Because I've found that the best results I get are when I give it some code that I've been working on and I just say, I want to add this, this, and that, or I want to change this. And the fact that it has something to riff on and kind of go off of and understand, this is the structure, this is how your data flows through your application, or this is the way that you like to write API calls, it makes the output so much better and more useful than if you just kind of vibe code it and say, hey, I want a page that looks like this, that does that, and it just, is given free rein to kind of figure out exactly how it might want to do it just without any guardrails.
Well, and if it does fall apart, I mean, Addie talks about needing to feel the struggle, which is very true. If you try to code something, feeling the struggle is how you end up learning. But that's also going to apply to AI. I mean, Jack just described it earlier. There's also the struggle involved with these AI processes, because at some point, if you rely too heavily on it, you will hit those walls, and you will reach the point where you're going to have to learn some stuff. So the same sort of struggle applies with manual coding, and also applies to using these AI-based tools. At some point, you're going to hit a wall, and you're going to have to learn and pivot and evolve.
Yeah, you'll also get better at kind of asking the AI something, seeing what it outputs, and choosing what you want to actually incorporate into your code base. Like, going back to that example with Claude Code, I watched it iterate 7 versions of a particular file because it was a complicated task that I was asking it to do. And I'm watching on the screen, code is being deleted, code is being rewritten, code is being deleted again, Claude is rewriting the file. So it was really interesting to watch it struggle as well. I mean, it struggled a lot faster. It was a few minutes of Claude thinking to itself and trying things and rewriting and writing again. But yeah, it's not perfect. And the more complicated, I guess, the request gets, the more the AI is going to have problems, because it's not something that there's lots of examples for, or people have done a lot in the past. So it does have to think too.
Yeah. A routine that I've gotten into is, like, I just did this with a company I was working with, and it was like, okay, we need to build a demo page for your thing, right? And so it was 80% of me just making sure that it was all the wires were connected up and all that sort of stuff. And then everything was, it looked like garbage, right? Hot garbage. But the nice thing was I could literally just like git commit that. I'm like, it works. And then I literally take a screenshot of it, give it over to the AI. I'm like, okay. And you're kind of like, oh, this is good. All right, like, let's give it a this vibe, that kind of thing. And you'd see it like change all the CSS and everything. And you're like, oh, there you go. And that's when you groove in and that kind of thing. And that's fun, right? Mm-hmm. And so you do the hard work, and then you have the fun on top of it to go and make it look all nifty and stuff. And that's great. But you got to know, like, the AI is really good for that kind of make this look like this kind of thing. But if it's like that kind of core infrastructure, like, okay, you got to use this library and blah 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 blah, that very precise stuff. Nah. It's easier to do that on your own.
Yeah. And I know that there are a lot of developers, and probably I've felt this way in the past, where it seems like it's cheating because we're not writing the code ourselves. The AI is, and it's doing it a lot faster and maybe better. But the flip side of that is that everybody else is using it, or practically everybody else, your competition, your coworkers, everyone else. So if you don't get on board and learn how to use it, you might not have a job in the not too distant future, as awful as that sounds.
Yep, you kind of have to adapt to the new world. So you experiment with it and figure out workflows that work for yourself, essentially, is probably the best path forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw somebody put up like a thing that was saying it's a red flag if the company you want to interview with is using AI for the interview, but it's a yellow flag if the interviewee, the candidate, is not using AI. And it's like,
they're going to try and brute force it through that interview themselves.
Right. If it's given to you, use it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have some lighter news as part of our bonus news. The first thing I wanted to discuss for bonus news is there is apparently a new browser that I learned. I found this just through an unrelated article, but there is a initiative called Ladybird, which is a brand new engine, which is nuts, by the way, because the web browsers are so complicated. The fact that somebody's trying to build one from scratch is a little bit, I think it's a little bit crazy.
That's ambitious.
Yeah, ambitious to say the least. But it's a new browser engine based off web standards without borrowing any code from other browsers. They've set themselves up as the Ladybird Browser Initiative, which is a 501c nonprofit in the U.S., tax exempt. And they did that to drive work on the browser and make it easier for supporters of all shapes and sizes to support development. And unlike traditional business models that rely on monetizing the user, Ladybird is funded entirely by sponsorships and donations from companies and individuals who care about the open web. So, Ladybird.
I've never heard of it. I think it's cool. They definitely have some big names behind them. The founder is, or the co-founder, I guess, is also the founder of GitHub and the former CEO of GitHub. They've added some new people to their board, which is their board of directors, who I guess kind of determines the direction that Ladybird is going. But they have some big open source people who have joined recently. They have a guy named Mike Shaver who worked at Mozilla and was one of the founding members of that platform. He was a VP of engineering and technical strategy. He worked at Facebook and Shopify as a distinguished engineer and engineering manager. And they've got a bunch of big names backing them. Shopify is one of them. Guillermo Rauch is another one. Mitchell Hashimoto, who created HashiCorp and sold that for $1 billion. JetBrains. If you just go down the list, there are some very, well-connected people, smart people, people with deep pockets. They've got quite a list of sponsors to start off with.
This is so ambitious, though. The idea, Chromium, Firefox, the code bases behind these have been around for decades, literal decades, and have evolved just the scale of web standards, because we keep adding web standards all the time. We don't really get rid of them. So, and to build a functional browser, you have to really support all of that. YouTube poke fun at Firefox sometimes for being a little bit behind on some of these features. But imagine if you still don't have support for forms and you need to code all of that from scratch. The scale of that is insane. But I'll try to be positive about this because I think it's an awesome initiative. To have a truly independent web browser that's not tied to any financial models. Chrome's business model is potentially problematic. It's been in court recently, as we've talked about on this show. So having something independent is awesome. I just think this is just so hard.
Yeah. They promised no monetization ever. They've fully open sourced the library so anybody can work on it. They have 7 engineers who are working on it full time. That's the entire development team. And then just other people who are contributing. It's very, very ambitious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just, the sponsorship thing, though, I don't know. That's a little bit worrisome because sponsorship oftentimes comes with strings, right? And so I don't know. That's it. It's always the financial model that's behind these things that you gotta wonder about. And I don't know, sponsorship. But maybe so. Maybe it's good. Maybe
we'll see.
There are no strings attached. Who knows?
Yeah, I looked at some of the FAQs that they have at the bottom of their website, which talks about sponsorships as well as other things, and it seems like you can be all sponsorships, it says, are in the form of unrestricted donations. So board seats and other forms of influence are not for sale. The only thing that you'll get for a sponsorship is your logo on their website saying that you are a sponsor. And depending on which sponsorship tier you choose, you may get your logo if you pay enough, or you just get your name and a link to your website, and that's it. All the people who are donating are people who want the open web to continue to thrive.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yep. Best of luck to them. We'll keep an eye out. I'm curious how much they're going to pop up in the news, because I only heard about it because it was linked to in just some completely unrelated AI article I was reading is prepping for this episode, and it's been around for a while, apparently several months now, and I hadn't heard of it, and so we'll see where this goes.
Yeah. They said that they're aiming for an alpha release to early beta testers in 2026, so we will see if that comes to pass.
Yeah, I think that's entirely realistic. 7 engineers working full time, you could probably get to 70-80% of the core functionality, pretty quickly. And then it's that last 20-30% is going to just be a grind, just because, as you say, the scale of the web spec is just Monstrous.
I wonder too, like there's quite the prioritization task that goes on, I imagine. 'Cause
Yeah.
I feel like you're right. If you focus on the main things that people use, you could probably get a decent ways, and then like the trailing end, maybe you even never need it because all you want is modern sites to work. You could just ditch a lot of the legacy stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
That
cool,
would be cool.
right there. Yeah, there's the nice cleaning house type effort that could go on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do either of you two have any other bonus news?
So I'm going to bring in one that I didn't plan for, but this is kind of related to the AI stuff and the kind of learning and critical skill stuff. So HTMX, the HTMX guy, is classic. So he's doing something very kind of interesting, and I wanted your opinion on it. So he's building this MTMC16 Montana mini computer, and the idea is that it's the teaching
Wait, say that one more time. That
MTM
was a lot of words.
Yeah, MTMC16 Montana mini computer. It's basically a 16-bit computer emulator. It's in the browser, I think. I haven't. Yeah, he's got a screenshot of it. But the idea is, as a teaching tool, he wants people to learn how to code on a computer, literally from like absolute scratch, like assembler, all the way up. Kind of from the ground roots up. And so he's building this little 16-bit computer, and you can see all the registers and all the blinking lights and all that kind of sort of stuff. And you would learn how to code starting in assembler. So I don't know, like, what's your take on that?
I have a hard time seeing the value, to be honest, in today's world.
Yeah.
I think it's really niche because I have 14-year-old kids who are toying with learning stuff at this point, and their tool of choice is Scratch, which if you've never seen it before, it's like a visual learning tool. It's kind of programming, but it's a programming mindset, but you do things like drag over an if and then drag over a clause into the if, and it kind of branches it out.
Yeah.
Logic.
But I think the reason it works so well as a teaching tool is it is so visual. You get to see, like, they're making little games with it and learning through that. And that's also how I learned. I learned building GeoCity sites. So again, like visual sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like this sort of thing would it be valuable to go through this process? I think absolutely you could learn a lot about just programming concepts, but I think it's for a niche type of person. It's probably for people that already have done some programming and want to get back to the basics and learn a bit more about how like a computer works as a more basic level, but not like a general purpose learning tool, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think learning it from absolutely that is your only path into computer science is like starting an assembler. I think you're just going to get super frustrated because you're not going to be able to get anything out of it really that you can kind of like show off as a like, oh, look, I just made this app that's going to help us do, whatever, balance our grocery budget better or whatever it is, that kind of thing, right? It's like you're never going to do that on this little 16-bit mini computer with assembler and registers and stuff. But on the other hand, it is, as you say, it is good to know, like, once you get into coding, like, oh, memory management, and this actually is meaningful, and this is how it works. And so maybe doing this kind of thing is good for that. Although even then, I think it might be too low level for that. But
Yeah. It feels like that's what you'd do if you wanted to be more on the hardware side of things. If that's really what interests you and you want to build computers or manage servers or do stuff like that close to the metal, absolutely. But if you want to build websites, you don't really care about that, or I don't really care about that. I'd much rather print something out to the screen and see it say hello world than try and figure out how to hook up, a bunch of circuit boards. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't feel like progress to me or valuable learning as opposed to seeing something on the screen or seeing something do what I wrote and wanted it to do.
Same.
Yeah. There you go.
But we'll link to it in the show notes because I just kind of want to visually see what he's up to because he's a smart dude and
he's a very smart dude.
Interesting to see. Yeah.
And I totally get that vibe of being frustrated at seeing the next generation come up and like them not having the kind of core skills that the previous generation did because we had to grunt through all this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, it's like, as I said, you want people to be able to get into things really quickly, which is kind of like on the other end of the spectrum. It's like vibe coding to me is like the front door for a lot of folks into
Yeah.
coding now. It's like, oh, look,
I agree.
I can go make this, blah, 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 blah. But I'm kind of interested. How does that actually work? And then you kind of get into it, right?
I agree. Like if you can build something and get the wow moment, then I think that can be the hook that then gets you to dig in.
Right. Exactly.
All right. I've got one last piece of bonus news. I promise I'm going to make it kind of quick, but I've got a story for both of you. This is actually going to be like a moral story or like a moral request. So we're going to go on a journey together.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But the news here is from Apple, and the news itself is not directly front-end related, but I promise I'm going to make it relevant here. So I got to give you like 2 minutes of context. So Apple, back in 2021, was in court with Epic Games about their App Store policies. And Apple mostly won this case. However, they did have to give on one specific thing. The judge basically ordered that developers have to be allowed to include links within their apps that could direct users to methods outside of the App Store. So an example here would be Spotify. Spotify, if people subscribe in the Spotify app, they have to pay Apple 30% of the revenue from that transaction. And basically what the judge said is that Apple, you have to provide some way for Spotify to link out, to say like, hey, you can sign up on the web, and that's another option. So Apple then decided they're basically why this has come back up is that Apple is back in court related to this, and it's now several years later, and they've done some discovery. So basically they've dug into Apple's internal mail and Slack messages to see, okay, Apple was forced legally to put in this link. What were the processes like internally that went through this? And it turns out Apple's processes created the most like anti-pattern UX that you've probably ever seen. And you've likely never actually seen this because they devised a system that was so bad that no developers are actually using it because it's so kind of honestly almost like a little bit evil, very extremely deceptive. So eventually the gist of it here is that so Apple had to come up with this. They had to decide, okay, well, what is this link going to look like? And then they have quotes in here because, again, they did discovery. So one employee said, let's add the phrase external website because it's, quote, sounds scary, so the execs will love it. Another employee gave a suggestion on how to make the screen, quote, even worse by using the developer's name rather than the app name. Quote, oh, keep going. Another Apple employee responded in Slack. And then when Tim Cook himself saw the screen for approval, he asked that they add another warning to state that Apple's privacy and security promises would no longer apply out on the web. And then they made another decision that prevented developers from using dynamic links that would keep users logged in because the company wanted to create more friction. And I found this fascinating because it's a rare glimpse into the decision-making process of an internal company, things that they never thought were going to come out publicly or be seen by the public eye. Now, the good news here is that the judge, because they saw all this, came down. You might have seen headlines around this because it's been in the news recently. Apple has to revert all of this. And basically, because they made this process so evil, now developers are going to be able to link out to their website. Apple is no longer going to be able to take commission on that. So the end of this is kind of a good thing, at least in terms of for developers. But I said I would make this moral, and my point is, all of us that work at companies at front ends are part of these sort of conversations, right? Like you're tasked with saying, okay, we need to add this button or whatever. And I would like to request that people be a voice for positive in these sort of conversations. Like if you're asked to do something that is highly deceptive or just, deceptive is probably the right word for it, that try to push back against that, honestly. Like it's kind of like a moral thing. If you're asked to do something that's wrong, push back, I guess, is my request. So I don't know if you found that interesting. Like I said, I told you it would be a meandering journey, but I just thought the internal discussion was fascinating and something that some of us have been a part of. I've been a part of those sort of conversations where I'm asked to do something that just feels wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Like, I got to tell you, because that your bonuses and your financial future is on the company. The company is clearly making X percentage of revenue from this particular, 30%, shave off of this thing. And, you know, to
probably
the
have
extent
stock
that
in the company, so
you have,
like you're,
exactly,
you know, if they successfully
Yeah.
get more money, more of that comes back to you.
And peer
Yeah,
pressure from your
right?
team and your managers and your higher ups.
That's really difficult, you know.
It
Like
is.
I've been part of those. Like the unsubscribe thing, you want to like make sure it's, you know, hidden in a, you know, the
Right.
text isn't particularly visible and all that sort of stuff. I don't think I've ever been part of that conversation particularly, but like certainly the companies I work for have done those kind of things where they've like made things that you don't really want the user to do, you know, harder.
Right.
You know, yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's just the Apple scale. That's what gets you caught out there. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that they got to see this stuff and it got revealed. I think that's even more interesting, as well as the deceptive practices that Apple went to make it so difficult for users or for developers. But wow, I'm surprised that all that stuff got out and got made public, among other things.
I guess that's another FYI that if you work at one of these bigger companies, just know that a lot of your internal conversations could potentially
Yeah.
be exposed because, I mean, Google's been in court, Apple's been in court, Meta's been in court. So if you're at one of these big companies that could get involved in legal things, know that the discovery process through the court system could expose a lot of your stuff, and it's just something you should be aware of. Because Tim Cook does not come out looking good from this, for example, because he was one of the bigger pushers that he did not like this process. He was pushing for Apple to make this process so bad that no one would actually use it, which they succeeded with. And I don't know. It's kind of sad, but it's I just thought it was a fascinating peek into this sort of process.
Yeah. And I mean, I like the final outcome, which is that Apple has to do better for
Yeah, it ended up
people who
costing
don't
them.
work for them and how it doesn't benefit them.
Yep.
Well, okay. So one last thing, as I was thinking about this, like, so there is like the societal like ramifications of this. It's like, okay, so from a consumer standpoint, if I buy Spotify through the Apple site, then they get 30%, but it's the same price as I would if I went to, you know, Spotify. So really, this is a like kind of money moving between Spotify and Apple, right? I'm not
Well, kind of. I mean, not to go too deep into this, but Spotify raises their prices 30%. So if you subscribe through Apple, you are paying 30% more.
Right.
And the bit of here that I got Apple involved is Spotify legally, per Apple's rules, could not tell people that it was cheaper on their website. So they had they would make it 30% more expensive in the app just to cover their own costs that are going to Apple. But it's cheaper to subscribe on their website, but they can't tell people that.
Okay.
Per Apple's policies.
Well, that sucks. But like, I was just kind of like contrasting, compare like a Spotify membership versus if I was working at a company that was doing predatory loans, and it was trying to like, we were trying to come up with a UI that would keep people from paying off their predatory loans and keeping it difficult to do that. Like, that's just straight evil. Right, you know, like having you pay a little bit more for like Spotify is like not exactly, you know, okay.
Yeah, how the margins are distributed is less of a problem than something like something involving like medical or financial.
Nobody's not gonna be able to
policies.
feed their kids, or they're gonna lose their house because they can't pay for Spotify. But if if that's gonna happen, then you should definitely like be the voice of reason, but you probably not work there in the first place.
I'm positive though we have listeners that are work for loan companies or banks or those sorts of things too, where these things do come up. So it's relevant. It's even more relevant in those contexts. So
yeah.
It's a hard situation to be in.
Yeah. So we've had some deep conversations today. Let's just go. Let's go into what's making us happy.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, Paige, tell us something happy.
I would recommend the Night Manager TV series. If either of you have not watched it, it is a series that I think originally came out on AMC like 9 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's on Amazon Prime now, so that's where I watched it. And there's now a chance that there will be a second season of it. But it is starring Tom Hiddleston, who is Loki in all the Marvel movies. It is starring Hugh Laurie, who is House and a bunch of other stuff. He's a great actor. But it's a great spy thriller. It's set a lot of it takes place in Cairo as well as in England. And you get to see all these like beautiful parts of Europe, because Hugh Laurie is a very, very wealthy man, and Tom Hiddleston kind of gets into his inner circle. He infiltrates it. So there's a lot of, espionage and spy thriller stuff, and it's just a really well done series. I think it's based on a book, which is probably part of why the story is as good as it is, but it's just really great. It's beautifully shot. The acting is superb. And it was really fun. It was 10 or 12 episodes, and we watched it in a weekend, and it was very exciting. So I would say if you like kind of the sort of thriller espionage type things, you should definitely give it a watch.
It definitely seems to be your thing, Paige. You've got a long list of spy thrillers that almost every week.
I know, we've really been on a spy kick, and not intentionally. It's just like that seems to be what's coming out or what's popular at the moment. So
there are a lot of those shows.
Yeah, like
for whatever reason.
Yeah, and Black Bag just came out. Did you guys see that movie, Black Bag?
No.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that one was good too.
It's a little dry, I found. I mean, but that director is always a little slow.
But yeah, it seems like, Black Dove on Netflix, and everybody's just, what was the one with Michael Fassbender recently? There's just a whole bunch, though, that are like MI6, MI5.
That was Black Bag, I think, the Michael Fassbender one.
Oh, that's right. He was in, but there's a show also that he was in recently that was another spy thriller.
Just keeps going.
Yeah. But yeah, it seems like we're really on a roll with those recently. Hollywood is all about them.
I think it works, though. They work really well for like the miniseries type thing. It's really well suited for that. So since that's a popular TV model nowadays, I think that's one reason why we just see a lot of them.
Yeah.
Jack, what is making you happy this week?
So Raycast, and I love Raycast. It's like I install it every time that I bring up a new machine. It's like one of the first things I install. Basically, a replacement for Spotlight on a Mac. Little command space. You brings up this little dialogue, and you can do all kinds of stuff with Raycast. They've got AI now integration and automations, and they just keep on going with this thing. It's an amazing tool, and now they've come out with an iOS version, Raycast for iOS, and it's just great. And like I gotta say, there's some I'm often envious of some of the stuff that I see on Android of folks like they'll point their camera at something and they'll be like, AI, what's this? That kind of thing. And I did that last night with this thing, and it was great. So, and it integrates with my Raycast on my computer, so we can share notes and all that kind of stuff. It's great, really good stuff.
Does it take over command space on the Mac?
You can bind it to whatever you want, but yeah, I got rid of. I never use Spotlight. I just use Raycast.
I have been frustrated with Spotlight recently, just not being good. So when I type fire into Spotlight, it wants to open my firewall settings on the Mac. And it's so dumb because it hasn't figured out. I open Firefox 700 times every day, and I open my firewall settings never. I don't even know what my firewall settings are for my Mac, but Spotlight has not chimed in on this. So through Spotlight, I have to type fire F for it to override the firewall settings so that I can open Firefox. And it's also been slower for me recently, so I might have to check this out because I'm getting frustrated.
Yeah, one of the things you can do is you can bind, you can have your favorites. So if Firefox is one of your favorites, then you can do literally command space, command 1 as your, one, you got 5, 1 through 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there you go. That's his Firefox, and up it comes. And you can you could even have a URL that you want to go to automatically and bind that to it or whatever. However you want it. It's just a fantastic, and there are plugins and extensions that can give you access to all of your integrate with Notion and integrate with Mail, do all that kind of fun stuff. It's a fantastic thing. In fact, I'll see if I can get you a YouTube video. The guy's like 100 things that you can do with Raycast, and it's phenomenal.
Oh wow!
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, my thing that's making me happy this week is really quick. I saw Linkin Park in concert yesterday, and it was an awesome show. I don't do a lot of concerts. That's not typically my thing, but I'm a big Linkin Park fan, and they're back touring, and we had a blast. It was good to go to see some live music. They're really good live. I had my doubts because Linkin Park is such a their music is there's a lot of electronic elements to what they do. I didn't know how good the live show would be, and yeah, that was really good. We enjoyed it.
Nice.
I would think maybe pretty rowdy. Was it rowdy?
No, it was a lot of people a lot of people in their 40s, which a lot of us just sitting around, bopping our heads, because I think that's the target audience for Linkin Park at this point. Like people who were into it in the 90s and are now in their 40s, and yeah, it was a good time.
Cool.
And I think that makes our episode. So thanks everybody for joining. Just as a reminder, we have our Discord channel, our social networks. We're on basically every social media, and those links are all in the show notes. And I want to thank, as always, our sponsor, the Blue Collar Coder channel. You can check Blue Collar Coder out on YouTube, and we have all those links in the show notes as well. But I think that is an episode, so we will see everybody next week.
See you next week.